So one of the biggest things that I learned from what happened to you, was like how important it is to like look beyond a person's behavior and like trying to understand what they may have experienced in their life. Also the idea of like changing the question basically from like what's wrong with you and asking what happened to you looks really meaningful to me. It made me think differently about how trauma can affect like the way people behave and cope and like form relationships and kind of like respond to stressful situations and stuff. Something else that stood out to me was learning that trauma can affect the brain and the nervous system. Um, sometimes sometimes, sorry, behaviors that look unhealthy or difficult from the outside can be a way that like a person has learned to survive and like cope with what they've experienced. I think professionally, this is important for social service workers because we're going to be working with people who've been through like many life experiences. We might not always have someone that like, someone that's been like sorry, we might not always know what someone has been through just by looking at their current situation. So the book reminded me that like when I like work in the future, like I need to be curious and empathetic and have patience instead of like making assumptions. And then for part two, for the outside resource, so I used a 2025 reviewed study. And it was about like implementing a trauma informed approach in a Canadian community organization that works with like young mothers. So this resource builds on like what I learned from what happened to you because it takes the idea of like trauma informed care and looks at how it can actually be used like in a community service setting. I think that it was important that like trauma informed care practice isn't only about like knowing that someone has experienced trauma. It also like involves changing the way like services are provided so that workers and organizations consider like the impact um, trauma can have on the people that they support. And the article article like also helped me understand that becoming trauma informed is like an ongoing process. It requires like education, um, changes within organizations and workers like who are willing to reflect on how they interact with clients. So for part three, like applying my learning okay, applying my learning to field placement. um I plan to apply what I learned from both resources during my field placement by being more aware of trauma when I interact with clients. Like one thing I think will come naturally to me is trying not to judge someone based only on their current circumstances or behaviors. Like I want to listen to people, like give them the opportunity to explain their experience rather than like assume I already understand their situation because I've been through a lot of difficult things myself. So it also gave me a little bit of a better understanding for myself. And then I can also like tra- I can also apply like trauma informed practice by paying attention to like how I communicate. Like for example, I can explain like what I'm doing, respect people's choices and boundaries, like listen actively and try and create like an environment where clients are like feeling respected and heard. Um something that might be challenging is remembering that trauma can sometimes show up through behaviors that are difficult to respond to. Like a client might be angry or like withdrawn or unwilling to like accept help. And in those moments, like it can be easy to become like frustrated or take someone's reaction personally. So my plan for dealing with that my plan for dealing with that challenge is like to remind myself to look underneath the behavior and like ask myself what might be contributing to like the person's response. That doesn't mean like ignoring inappropriate behavior or not having professional boundaries, but it does mean like responding calmly and like respectfully. And then I also obviously plan to like use my supervision during my placement. Like if I experience a situation that I'm like unsure how to handle, I can speak with like my supervisor and then kind of like reflect on what happened and ask what I could do differently next time. But overall, what I want to carry into my placement from these resources is the understanding that like behavior often has a reason behind it. And as a future social service worker, like I don't necessarily need to know every detail of someone's trauma to treat them with like compassion and respect and dignity. Um, so yeah, that's kind of what I took from the book and what I've learned. Thank you.